Let's bring a parent up, maybe someone who could use a little confidence." The room chuckled. The jab wasn't even subtle. Jack Rowan shifted uneasily on the bench. His calloused hands rested on his knees. The sleeves of his old flannel shirt rolled halfway up his forearms. He didn't look up, didn't flinch. But he heard it, felt it in every ripple of laughter that followed. Mr. Rowan coach Craig Dalton called again, his voice louder, more theatrical. "You're Luke's dad, right? Why don't you come show the kids what bravery looks like?" A few parents glanced over with polite smiles. Some teenagers snickered. One whispered, "Isn't that the mechanic guy Jack?" exhaled slowly through his nose. Next to him, Luke stared down at the floor, his small fists clenched at his sides. "You don't have to, Dad." Jack put a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's okay, bud." He stood slowly and walked toward the center of the blue mat, worn boots squeaking faintly against the polished floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, white and cold. Craig towered over him, a striking contrast in his crisp, white jai, the black belt at his waist, gleaming with embroidered stripes. The man looked like he walked out of a sports commercial, perfect posture, polished smile, and just enough arrogance to leave a bitter aftertaste. Jack simply nodded. "You ever trained before?" Craig asked loud enough for the crowd to hear. Jack's voice was calm. "Not really." The laughter was polite, but real. "All right then," Craig said, grinning. "Let's keep it light. Just a demonstration. No injuries, no lawsuits." Jack said nothing. He simply took a stance, awkward, loose, almost apologetic. Craig lunged forward in mock attack, a half-speed punch aimed at Jack's shoulder. Jack barely moved. The punch landed with a soft thud. He stumbled backward theatrically. "Whoa," Craig chuckled. "Guess I hit harder than I thought." There were laughs again, louder this time. From the benches, Luke watched frozen shame rising in his chest like smoke in a sealed room. Another punch. Jack didn't block, just took it softly, falling back onto one knee. Someone whispered, "Why'd he even agree to this?" Craig turned to the crowd. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when you skip leg day." More laughter. One woman actually clapped. Jack stood slowly brushing off his jeans. His eyes never left the floor. Then a voice cut through the noise like a rifle crack. Enough. It wasn't loud, but it stopped everything. Heads turned. Craig's smile faltered. At the entrance of the dojo stood a young woman in military fatigues, boots dusty from the road duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her blonde hair was braided tight beneath her cap. She had a small scar above her right brow and a posture that made people move without thinking. "I'll take his place," she said, walking toward the mat. Craig raised an eyebrow. "Sorry, who are you? Sergeant Samantha Vega, U.S. Army. And I believe you just made a fool out of a man who didn't come here to fight." There was a pause. The crowd shifted in their seats. Craig looked her up and down. "You here for a class?" "I'm here to apply for the self-defense instructor position," she said flatly. "But I figure you'd rather test strength than qualifications." Craig laughed, the sound bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat. "You sure about this? I don't take it easy on soldiers." "Good," she replied. "We don't need you to." A murmur swept through the room. Someone pulled out a phone. Luke's eyes widened. Sam dropped her duffel at the edge of the mat and stepped barefoot into the circle. She bowed, eyes never leaving Craig's. Craig bowed back, but there was mockery in it. Then he struck. His first jab was fast, much faster than what he'd thrown at Jack, but Sam blocked it cleanly with her forearm twisted under and responded with a sweep that nearly took his balance. Gasps echoed around the room. Craig grunted, regrouped, and launched a hook. Sam ducked, planted her foot, and landed a palm strike to his chest that made him stagger backward. The room erupted in applause. Craig's eyes flashed. His smile vanished. This wasn't fun anymore. He stepped in harder now. A knee to her ribs blocked. A feint low, then elbow high she caught it. Countered, pivoted, but her foot slipped slightly. Just enough. Craig seized the moment. He grabbed her by the shoulder, twisted hard, and with one loud pop, her arm buckled. She dropped. The room went still. Craig stood over her, panting victorious. "Nice try, Sergeant." Sam gritted her teeth, clutching her arm, her face pale, but her eyes defiant. Luke stood. Dad Jack had already moved. He didn't shout, didn't run. He walked slow, deliberate across the mat. Craig turned, already grinning again. "You want another go, Mr. Rowan?" Jack looked down at Sam. She whispered, "Don't." But he was already standing in front of Craig. This time there was no loose stance, no slouched shoulders. Jack straightened, silent, composed, and for the first time everyone saw it. His shoulders weren't weak, they were measured. His eyes weren't tired, they were focused. And his hands, still calloused from engine grease, curled slightly, not like fists, but like memory. Craig chuckled. All right. One last dance. He lunged, but Jack wasn't there. He had stepped aside, clean and effortless, and tapped Craig's elbow mid-strike, redirecting the force into nothing. Craig stumbled forward, surprised. He turned, and Jack's palm was already at his chest. Not striking, just resting. "You've had your show," Jack said, his voice quiet but steady. "Now sit down." Craig froze. No one laughed this time, and for the first time that night, someone clapped. Then another, and another, until the room filled with the sound of people finally recognizing a man they'd all looked through. Jack didn't bow. He simply turned, knelt beside Sam, and helped her up. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," Jack replied without looking at Craig, "but someone had to." The smell of antiseptic and old leather lingered in the dojo's back office as Samantha Vega sat on the edge of a padded bench, her right arm cradled against her side. A makeshift sling held her shoulder in place, tight but manageable. Her breath came shallow, measured. Controlled pain was still pain. Outside, the faint sounds of the class, resuming, floated in the thud of feet on mats, the barked commands of an assistant coach, trying to recover order. But inside this room, silence hung like fog. Jack stood by the door, one hand still resting on the frame, as if unsure whether he was allowed to be in this space. "You didn't have to do that," she said again, breaking the quiet. He looked at her. "Neither did you." A beat passed. Her eyes, sharp even through the exhaustion, studied him like a drill sergeant sizes up a recruit. "You took hits you didn't need to. Let him humiliate you." Jack didn't flinch. Luke was watching. She blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't want him to see me." "Break someone," Jack said quietly. "I'd rather he think I'm weak than watch me become what I used to be." Samantha nodded slowly. Then she let out a long breath and smirked. "You're not just a mechanic." He didn't smile back. "I used to be a lot of things." Her smirk faded. There was something in his tone, regret maybe, or something heavier. "I came here for a job," she said, adjusting the sling slightly. "Self-defense instructor for women. They said I needed to demonstrate command presence. Guess I did." Jack gave a dry chuckle. "More than enough." She looked away for a moment, then said, "I've seen a lot of men like Craig. They punch down because they've never had to punch up." Jack crossed the room and pulled a stool near her bench. He didn't sit, just leaned forward on it, elbows on his knees. "People like that don't need to be stopped," he said. "They need to be outlasted. Shown up. Quietly. In front of the people they think they're impressing." Samantha looked at him again. "What exactly did you used to do?" He hesitated. "Let's just say, I used to be the man they called when things were already broken." She raised an eyebrow. "Military," he nodded once slow. "Something like that." "Special Forces," Jack looked down. "It's not something I talk about. Fair," she said. Then after a moment, you didn't throw a single punch. You know that, right? I do. But you won. He nodded again, eyes distant. It wasn't just Craig you were beating, she added. It was everything he stands for. Jack finally looked at her, and this time his gaze held weight. That's not winning. That's surviving. There was a long pause before she said, "Still." It was the first time in a long while I felt like someone had my six. Jack stood quietly and stepped to the mini fridge in the corner. He took out a bottle of cold water and handed it to her. "You're not used to letting people help, are you?" he asked. Samantha took the bottle. "What gave me away?" "The fact you tried to finish the fight with a dislocated shoulder." She smirked again. "Wouldn't have been the first time. Shouldn't have been this time." Their eyes locked. For a second there was silence, not uncomfortable but full. Charged. She broke it first. "You have a quiet anger about you." Jack looked at her. "And you've got something to prove. That's what keeps us alive, right?" He shook his head. "No. What keeps us alive is learning when to stop fighting." Samantha looked away again. Her fingers curled tighter around the water bottle. "You lost someone," she said softly, like the words had just been dropped into the room without permission. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "So did I," she continued. "My brother. He served with someone. SEAL team, I think. Got caught in a blast in Syria. Whole convoy went dark. He was my hero." Jack exhaled slowly but didn't speak. "You ever lose someone and feel like the guilt's worse than the grief?" she asked. He finally nodded. "Every day." She looked at him, then really looked. "You think it ever goes away?" "No," he said. "But sometimes it gets quieter." Samantha leaned back against the wall. For a moment her expression softened, not the soldier's mask, but the woman underneath it. I think she said, "We don't just carry the people we lost. We carry who we were before we lost them." That landed like a stone. Jack turned back toward the door, hand gripping the frame again. "Your son," she said behind him. "He was watching today." He paused. "You didn't show him weakness," she said. "You showed him restraint. And that's rarer than strength." Jack didn't reply, but he nodded once, and that was enough. As he opened the door to leave, she called out Jack. He turned. "I don't know what you were," she said, "but I know who you are now, and that man is worth knowing." Jack met her eyes, and for the first time that night, his lips curved just slightly into a smile that barely made it to his eyes. "Rest that shoulder, Sergeant," he said. "Something tells me this place hasn't seen the last of either of us." Then he disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind the silence and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The sun had barely begun to rise over the ridge when Jack stepped into his modest garage. Dust floated in beams of pale morning light. The scent of oil and old metal clung to everything comforting familiar. He wasn't here for work. Not yet. He opened the steel cabinet in the far corner, pulled out a battered duffel bag, and laid it on the workbench like a coffin. For years it had sat untouched. He stared at it for a long moment, before unzipping it with a slow, reluctant hand. Inside a pair of fingerless gloves worn thin at the knuckles, a folded set of black tactical fatigues, a military-issued ID expired, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a sweat-stained towel, a coin, heavy, black, silent. SEAL Team 6, DevGru. Engraved on the coin's edge were the words, "Silence is the loudest kill." Jack exhaled. His hand hovered over the coin but didn't lift it. Not yet. "Dad." The voice was small, hesitant Luke's. Jack turned quickly, zipping the duffel closed in one motion. "Hey, buddy, you're up early." Luke stood at the garage entrance in pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "You weren't in the kitchen." "I couldn't sleep," Jack said, forcing a soft smile. "Just needed to check on something." Luke looked at the duffel. Was that your army stuff? Jack paused. Something like that. Is that why you were so fast yesterday? Jack walked over, crouched down. What happened yesterday? That wasn't about being fast. It was about knowing when to act and when not to. But he was hurting people. Why didn't you just stop him right away? Jack looked into his son's eyes. Honest, curious, wounded. Because I used to stop people for a living, he said quietly. And one day, I stopped someone too hard. I promised myself I wouldn't be that man again. Luke frowned. But you were a hero. Jack shook his head gently. No, kiddo. Heroes save people. I followed orders. And sometimes that's not the same thing. Luke seemed to think on that. Did the army make you stop being you? He asked softly. Jack blinked. No, he said. But losing people did. He stood, tousled Luke's hair. Go get ready for school. I'll make pancakes. Luke nodded, but before he turned away, he asked one more question. Is she okay? The soldier lady. Jack smiled. Tough as nails. She'll be all right. That afternoon, Jack returned to the dojo, not as a student, not as a show, but quietly through the side door. The space was empty, save for Samantha standing barefoot on the mat, her injured shoulder still in a sling, her movements slow but precise. She practiced with her left arm, only kicks, pivots, guarded blocks. Jack watched silently for a moment, then cleared his throat. You're not exactly great at taking recovery advice. Sam turned, but didn't stop moving. You ever known a soldier who was? I know a few who regretted pushing too soon. She smirked. That's why I go slow. He stepped closer, arms crossed. You're training with one arm. It's still one more than the guy I dropped in Kabul. Jack raised an eyebrow. You were in Kabul, 2018. 82nd Airborne. I was attached to a Marine recon unit for joint drills, until things went sideways. Jack nodded slowly. I was near there. Same year. Sam paused. You said you used to be the guy they called when things were already broken. I didn't say they stopped calling, he said. Her gaze sharpened. You walked away. I buried too many men with first names. Silence. I get it, she finally said. My brother, he never came back. Not even his tags. Just a flag. Jack's eyes dropped. What was his name? Jeremy Vega. He was a light. Always the loudest laugh in the barracks. He signed up to protect people who couldn't fight for themselves. Jack said nothing for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, I knew him. Sam froze. Jack looked up. Your brother. He was the radio op in an op gone wrong north of the city. I was on overwatch. We were supposed to extract at 500. Ambush blew the route. We lost 3. Jeremy was 1. Sam's voice cracked. You were there, I saw it. I tried to reach him. I failed. She took a step back. Why didn't you say something? Because what do you say to a sister whose brother died while you walked away? Breathing Sam's breath hitched. He always said he'd die with honor. Jack nodded. He did. They stood in that fragile silence full of unspoken grief and impossible healing. Then Sam said something Jack would remember for the rest of his life. Maybe. It's not your job to carry his death. Maybe it's your job to carry what he stood for. Jack blinked hard, throat tightening. He hadn't realized how badly he'd needed someone to say that. He stepped onto the mat beside her. You ever train in Aikido basic level? Jack extended his hand. Then let's fix that. She looked at him, wary, guarded, but then she took his hand. He led her through slow, fluid movements, correcting posture, with a teacher's touch, gentle, precise. It wasn't about the fighting. It was about balance, about trust. And for the first time in years, both of them let someone in. Outside the dojo, the sun was setting. Inside, Two broken soldiers began to remember what it meant to move without pain, to breathe without guilt. And neither of them knew it yet, but something had just shifted quietly, undeniably in the foundation beneath their lives. The evening air was cool, touched with the dry scent of cedar from the hills. Jack leaned against the hood of his old truck, arms folded, watching the small town fade into soft amber under the setting sun. The day was over, but his thoughts weren't. They were circling restless, like an old engine that wouldn't shut down. The dojo's parking lot was nearly empty. Most of the students had gone home, but inside a single light still glowed. Samantha. He'd waited partly out of habit, partly out of something he didn't want to name yet. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the strange, steady pull toward a woman who didn't flinch when life hit her hard. She just stood back up, like she expected to bleed, and kept going anyway. The door opened. Sam stepped out, slinging her duffel bag over her good shoulder. She wore a worn-out t-shirt that read, "Fort Benning Women Lead," and a tired smirk. Jack straightened. "You trained through dinner again." "Dinner's overrated," she replied, unlocking her car with a beep. "Besides, pain builds character." He gave her a sideways look. "That's exactly what people say right before they need surgery." She chuckled. "You're not wrong." He hesitated. "You hungry?" She paused, studying his face for a second. "Is that an offer I make a mean grilled cheese?" he said, tone neutral but eyes searching. Sam tilted her head. "That's dangerously close to a date, Rowan." He shrugged. "I call it gratitude. You took a hit meant for me." She gave him a long look, then smiled. "All right. But if the cheese isn't sharp enough to bite back, I'm leaving." Jack nodded toward the truck. "Fair warning. I drive stick." "Good," she said, climbing in. "I don't trust people who don't." Jack's house was small, one story, all earth tones and simplicity. Everything inside was clean, but lived in. A single leather couch, a wall of framed photos that stopped abruptly around 2015, and a table covered with drawings clearly made by a 9-year-old with big ideas about dragons and rocket ships. Luke's room was dark, the door cracked open. "Is he asleep?" Sam whispered. "Out cold," Jack said. Setting a pan on the stove, math homework did him in. She smiled, walking slowly around the space. Her eyes paused on a photo of Jack in uniform, younger, harder, less tired. He stood beside a group of men, all laughing in the heat of somewhere far away. "Is this them?" she asked. Jack turned slightly. "Yeah. That's Carson Mendez Stone. And that's Cooper, the one who—" He cut himself off. Sam glanced over. "The one you lost." He nodded softly. "The one I broke." She walked to the window, her silhouette framed by the light over the sink. "You ever think about who you'd be if none of it happened?" "All the time," he said, flipping a sandwich. "But then I look at Luke, and I think, maybe this is who I was supposed to be all along." Sam turned back, something warm and wounded in her expression. "That kid worships you. I'm not sure he should." "That's the point, Jack. You're not trying to be a hero. You're just showing up. That's what sticks with kids. Not perfection presence." Jack stared at her. "You sound like someone who's been through the other side of that equation." She nodded slowly. "My dad was a legend in his unit. Medals, parades, speeches. But he wasn't at my graduation. Or my enlistment. He said he wanted me to be strong, so he made sure I never needed him." Jack frowned. "That's not strength. That's absence with a good excuse." She met his gaze, and for a long second, they just looked at each other. No bravado. No roles. Just the unspoken understanding of two people who'd been trained to suppress everything, now realizing how much of themselves they'd buried in the process. The grilled cheese hissed softly in the pan. "Tell me about the scar," Jack said, nodding toward her shoulder. She touched the edge of it absently. IED. Iraq. We were clearing a school after an explosion. Roof collapsed on us. I took shrapnel and 3 years of guilt because I froze for 6 seconds. He leaned against the counter. That doesn't sound like something you should carry alone. I don't. Not anymore. She paused. You helped with that. He smiled, a slow, small thing. Well, I make decent sandwiches. She walked toward him, her tone quiet but clear. No, Jack. You made me feel seen, not saluted, not measured, just seen. They stood close now, the sandwich forgot in the air warm but still. You ever think about trying again, she asked. Jack blinked. With what? Life. People. Letting someone back in. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a plate, placed the sandwich on it, and handed it to her with quiet care. Then softly. Every day. But I'm scared that if I open that door again, the man who comes out won't be the one people need. Sam held his gaze. Then let someone meet him. Halfway, she said. You don't have to come out all at once. Jack swallowed. And then quietly, finally, he nodded. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes on the porch. Inside, 2 souls, scarred by war, sat across from each other breaking bread, not just to eat, but to begin something new. Something that might not yet be love, but was already more than silence. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at fall. Leaves rustled along the sidewalk outside Master Craig's dojo, swirling like they were caught in the tension that had lingered since the incident. Inside, the mats had been cleaned, but the memory of what happened that day hadn't been wiped away so easily. Sam sat in the corner of the small student lounge, one leg folded beneath her, the other stretched out as she flipped through a thick manila folder. Her injured shoulder rested gently against a pillow propped behind her. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched beside her as she scanned the papers with a furrowed brow. Jack watched her from the doorway, leaning silently against the frame. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she looked so immersed, so focused, it felt like interrupting would be breaking something sacred. You ever going to say what's in that file? He asked, finally his voice soft. Sam didn't look up. It's my brother's case file, the unofficial one, or the one they don't send home. Jack stepped inside slowly. Where'd you get it? A friend in Intel. Took me 2 years to get them to send it. It arrived last week. He nodded. Why now? She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. Because I saw you move. Jack held her eyes. And Sam closed the folder, her expression unreadable. And now I know what I've suspected for years. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the kids lining up in the adjacent room for class. Her voice was low-measured. The report says there was one man who broke protocol, left his position to retrieve the wounded under fire. They called it reckless, said it cost them the mission, said that man refused to give his name. Jack didn't speak. Sam turned to face him, holding the file against her chest like armor. You were there, weren't you? A long silence passed. Jack looked down at the floor, jaw tight. I was overwatch for your brother's convoy. I had eyes on the road. Saw the explosion happen. Heard the screams in my headset. He swallowed, voice hoarse. I broke rank. Moved in without authorization. Thought I could pull him out. Got 3 of the others. But by the time I reached him, it was too late. The vehicle went up. I never forgave myself for not getting him to. Sam didn't cry, but her voice trembled with something heavier than tears. Why didn't you tell me? Jack's voice was a whisper. Because I thought if I said his name out loud, you'd see me not as the man I am now, but the one who failed him then. She looked at him for a long, loaded moment, then stepped closer. You didn't fail him, she said. You honored him. Jack's eyes flickered. Every step you took that day, every risk you took, was because you refused to leave a brother behind, she said. That's not failure. That's the kind of man I wish more people were. Jack looked away, his throat tight. He believed in people. That's what I remember most about him. He believed everyone deserved to be saved. Sam nodded. That's what he told me in his last letter. She reached into the file and pulled out a worn envelope. She handed it to Jack. He wrote this 2 days before the ambush. I didn't open it until last year. Jack took the letter carefully, hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. He read silently, his eyes scanning the neat block handwriting. If something happens to me, don't let it break you, Sam. Don't become hard just because the world is. There are still good men out there. I served with one. He doesn't talk much, but I'd trust him with my life. They call him Ghost. And if you ever meet him, tell him I said thanks. Tell him I knew he'd come for me. Jack's hands trembled. His chest rose and fell uneven. Sam reached out and touched his arm gently. I think he already forgave you, she whispered. Long before you ever needed it. Jack's voice cracked. I didn't ask for forgiveness. No, she said softly, but maybe it's time you gave it to yourself. They stood in silence, both staring down at the letter. In the other room, the sound of children's laughter filtered in, muffled but bright. Life was still happening louder, freer just on the other side of the door. Sam turned toward the window again. Craig's holding an exhibition match next weekend. Parents, students, local sponsors. Full audience. He's calling it a discipline showcase. But it's a power play, a way to win back the narrative. Jack exhaled. And let me guess, he wants us to participate. He asked me directly. Told me if I want to prove myself, I can step into the ring against his elite student. Jack looked at her carefully. You said yes. Not yet, she replied. But I'm thinking about it. Your shoulder isn't ready, Jack warned. She smirked. Neither was my heart. But I keep showing up anyway. He studied her for a moment, then said, What are you trying to prove? Sam's expression turned serious. That strength doesn't have to be loud. That control is power. That people like your son deserve to see someone stand up to bullies without becoming one. Jack nodded slowly. Then let me train you. Sam raised an eyebrow. Yui met her gaze with quiet intensity. You've got the fight. But I've seen what happens when good people walk into a rigged match. If you're going to step into his ring, we do it right. Together. She smiled. Well then, Ghost. Let's make some noise. Jack smiled back, the old pain in his eyes giving way just slightly to something new. Purpose. Outside, the sun moved higher in the sky. Inside, 2 broken warriors stood not as remnants of war, but as allies in something deeper than vengeance. Redemption. Jack stepped onto the mat, barefoot, steady. The dojo was quieter than usual, not because it was empty, but because the room held a different kind of energy. There were no shouting instructors, no showy kicks for applause. Just quiet breathing, hesitant feet, and a circle of kids who didn't quite believe they belonged here. Across from him, Sam adjusted the stance of a boy with a prosthetic leg. She crouched to eye-level, her voice even and gentle. Balance comes from here, she said, tapping her own core. Not from your foot, not from your arms. Right here. You don't need what the world says you're missing. The boy nodded slowly. Tried again. Jack turned his gaze around the room. There was Maya, a 10-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a full sentence since arriving 2 weeks ago. Her wide brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and fierce attention. There was Darnell Small for 12, who wore his hoodie even in summer to avoid stares at the scars along his arms. And in the center, there was Luke, his son leading the group in warm-ups. Voice clear, shoulders square, his stutter gone, replaced by a quiet confidence Jack didn't recognize, but deeply respected. Luke called out, "Remember, breathe first. Move second." Sam caught Jack's glance and nodded almost imperceptibly. "He's leading," she said quietly. "And they're following." Jack didn't reply. His throat tightened a little. He hadn't seen this side of his son before. This strength, and it didn't come from fear or toughness. It came from empathy. It came from watching his father choose control over chaos. They called it the compassion class. It wasn't on the schedule. There was no charge, no belt tests, no trophies. Just twice a week after hours for kids who didn't shout the loudest or kick the highest. For the ones who were overlooked or overwhelmed. For the ones who needed martial arts not for sport, but survival. Sam stood beside a teenage girl named Amira, helping her with a block sequence. Amira wore a hijab, had transferred schools 3 times in 2 years, and barely met anyone's eyes. "You don't have to hit hard," Sam told her, guiding her wrist. "You just have to hold your space." Amira looked up. "But what if they don't stop?" Sam smiled. "Then you let them see that you're not afraid to stand." Amira's eyes flickered. Then she nodded. Nearby, Darnell struggled with a partner drill. He moved slow, unsure, flinching every time someone came close. Jack walked over, knelt beside him. "You okay?" he asked. Darnell looked away. "I don't like it when people get too close." Jack nodded. "You don't have to finish the drill. Want to just breathe with me?" The boy blinked, then nodded slowly. They sat cross-legged on the mat. Jack inhaled, held, exhaled. Darnell followed. 2 breaths, then 4. And when the class ended, Darnell stayed behind to help put away the mats. That night, as Jack locked the dojo doors, Sam stood beside him holding a clipboard filled with scribbled notes. "I've never seen anything like this," she said. "Not in the Army, not in the VA, not in any gym." Jack smiled. "That's because we're not building fighters. We're building belief." She looked at him. "That's a big mission for a man who used to call himself Ghost." He shrugged. "Maybe ghosts just need somewhere to haunt less and heal more." Sam stared at him, her voice softer now. "You don't have to carry their ghosts alone, you know." Jack met her gaze. "I'm starting to believe that." They stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the wind pick up outside. The world was still full of noise and trouble. But in this small corner, there was peace. Earned, not given. The compassion class became a whisper through town. Parents who'd been ashamed to ask for help now stood outside the windows, watching their kids find strength in silence, in discipline, in gentleness. Local officers dropped by to observe. One offered to donate uniforms. Another brought pizza and sat cross-legged on the floor with the kids. One evening, a grandmother in a bright red church dress pulled Jack aside and said, "You gave my baby back his smile. I don't care what they say about you. You're doing God's work here." Jack didn't know what to say. He just nodded and blinked fast. One Thursday afternoon, Luke stood in front of the class, palms pressed together. "Today," he said, "I want us to learn a word my dad taught me." The kids leaned in. "It's restraint. That means having power, but choosing not to hurt. That's the strongest thing you can do." Silence followed, then a single clap, then another, until the room filled with applause, not for punches or kicks, but for a boy who had once hidden behind his father, now stepping into the light. Jack watched from the back hand resting on the doorknob. Sam appeared beside him. "You raised him right," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "He's teaching me now." Later that night, as they walked toward the parking lot together, Sam asked the question that had been sitting between them for days. "Why didn't you do this sooner?" Jack, the teaching. The giving back. He paused, hands in his jacket pockets. "Because I thought I was too broken to offer anything worth giving." And now Jack looked toward the dojo, its windows glowing like a lighthouse in the dusk. Now I know the cracks are where the light comes through. Sam stopped walking. She looked at him. Say that again, she said. Jack smiled faintly. The cracks are where the light comes through. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she whispered, You're more than just a ghost. He turned to her, and for the first time didn't look away. The wind rustled the brittle autumn leaves outside Jack's house, making the old porch creak like it carried secrets. Inside, the lights were low. The air held that strange kind of quiet that arrives just before something shifts forever. Sam sat on Jack's worn leather couch, a weathered green field journal in her lap. She hadn't opened it yet. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what she might find. It had arrived that afternoon in an unmarked envelope. No return address. No explanation. Just her brother's name scrawled across the front in thick black marker. Jeremy Vega. She stared at the journal's cover, cracked at the spine corners, curled like a book that had been carried through war. Jack watched her from the kitchen doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee he'd nearly forgotten he made. His instincts told him not to press. Not with Sam, not with this, but something in her silence felt heavy. Ancient. Want me to give you space? He asked softly. She didn't look up. No. Stay. He set the mugs on the table and sat beside her, careful not to let their knees touch. The room smelled faintly of cedar and motor oil, and the warmth between them came not from proximity, but permission. I didn't know he kept a journal, she said. Most of us didn't. Soldiers write things they can't say. She opened it slowly, flipping through pages of sketches, coordinates, scribbled fragments of songs, and inside jokes no one alive would understand. Then she stopped. Her eyes locked on a page near the back where the handwriting had changed, less clean, more urgent. The ink smeared slightly as if written during movement or fear. She read aloud. If this is the last thing I write, tell my sister. Tell her I wasn't afraid. Tell her I chose this. Tell her I went where I believed I was most needed. And if you ever find him, Ghost, tell him I don't blame him. He saved everyone else, just not me. Sam's voice cracked. Her hands went limp, the journal slipping slightly from her fingers. Jack reached out instinctively, steadying it before it fell. She covered her face with both hands, a deep, trembling breath escaping her chest. And then finally, she wept. Not the silent tears she usually fought back with clenched fists, but a full, unguarded sob that echoed in the quiet of Jack's living room. He didn't speak, didn't try to stop it, didn't try to fix it. He just sat there beside her, letting her fall apart, because sometimes grief needs an audience, not a solution. When her sobs subsided into hiccuped breaths, she looked at him through damp lashes. All this time, she whispered, I thought you carried guilt because you failed him. But you didn't. He let go first. He made peace before I ever knew he was gone. Jack stared at the floor, his voice low and strained. He should have lived. I had 20 more seconds, maybe 30. He didn't see it that way, she said. And neither do I. Jack turned toward her, and for the first time since they'd met, she didn't see the ghost of a man who had retreated from life. She saw a man who had held too much pain for too long, blaming himself for what wasn't his to own. I've hated you, she said, voice trembling but honest, not with words, but quietly, for being the last one near him, for surviving. I know Jack replied. I hated me too. But now, she touched the open page again. Now I know he didn't. She looked up, her voice steadier. I'm sorry, Jack. He blinked. For what? Forever mistaking your silence for weakness, she said. You didn't walk away. You carried the weight so the rest of us could stand. Jack's lips parted, but no words came. Something in him, Something old, buried, moved. Not crumbled, not broke. Moved. Like a tectonic plate in his chest, finally shifting toward light. I didn't know who I was after that day, he admitted. Not really. I just disappeared behind the man I thought I had to be. Sam reached for his hand, not romantically, but with the sacred intimacy of shared survival. You were still him, she said, even when no one saw it. Especially then. They sat like that hand in hand, two warriors who had stopped running, not from war, but from themselves. Later, when the candles flickered low and the night had deepened, Sam placed the journal gently on Jack's table and looked at him with eyes full of something new. Not grief, not duty. Trust. You ever wonder what's next for people like us? She asked. Jack leaned back. I used to think the best we could do was survive quietly. And now, he met her gaze. Now I think, maybe we're meant to teach others how to survive loudly, with dignity, with grace. Sam smiled, and in that smile was every inch of the girl she used to be, and every bit of the woman she'd become. Then let's do it, she said. Let's stop pretending we're broken. Jack chuckled. We're not broken. She tilted her head. We're just rebuilding, he said. And for once, that didn't feel like a lie. The air at the county fall fair buzzed with sugar sweat and spectacle. Ferris wheels groaned over the laughter of children. The scent of funnel cake floated through the crisp October wind. And somewhere near the heart of it all, a small crowd began to gather in front of a makeshift ring bordered by ropes and hay bales. At the center stood Master Craig, arms folded, microphone in hand, the kind of grin that made Jack's stomach knot. Ladies and gentlemen, Craig's voice thundered through the fairgrounds. PA system, today isn't just about cotton candy and pumpkin pie. Today's about strength tradition, and reminding folks who really owns this town's discipline. Jack stood at the back of the crowd, with Sam and Luke, his jaw clenched tight. He'd hoped this was just rumor, a stunt. But Craig wasn't bluffing. There was a banner behind the ring now fluttering in the breeze. Challenge the master. One night only. You've got to be kidding me, Sam muttered. But it was no joke. Craig held the mic like a showman and raised one brow dramatically. I hear there's a new dojo in town, he continued. I hear they're teaching kindness. He spat the word like it tasted bad. Compassion. I even heard they got a few kids doing Tai Chi with teddy bears. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Luke's hands balled into fists at his sides. Jack stepped in, gently resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Easy, Jack said. Let him talk. Craig wasn't done, and I hear his eyes scanned until they landed squarely on Jack, that the man running this operation isn't even licensed. Just some has-been with oil on his hands and ghosts in his head. More laughter, some nervous, some cruel. Jack stayed still, silent, grounded. Craig smirked. So here's my offer. Ghost, he said, leaning into the mic. Send me your best, anyone you've trained. Let's give the town a show. You've got 30 minutes. Or walk away and let the crowd see what you're really made of. The crowd turned hundreds of eyes on Jack. He shook his head slowly, then raised his voice just enough to be heard. This isn't a circus, Craig. We don't train to entertain. Craig laughed, exaggerated and theatrical, spoken like a man who knows his students wouldn't last a round. Sam stepped forward before Jack could stop her. I'll do it, she said. Clear. Strong. No hesitation. A hush fell over the crowd. Craig blinked. I'm sorry. You heard me, Sam said, stepping closer to the ring. I'll represent the dojo. A few teenagers in the crowd snickered. A man holding a turkey leg whispered, Is she serious? Craig burst out laughing, clapping slowly. A girl with a floating shoulder. That's the best you've got. Jack's face darkened. Sam, don't. But she didn't turn. He challenged us, she said quietly. And you said we teach them to stand, not just when it's safe. She's right, Luke whispered. They're all watching Dad. Jack looked around, at the kids from compassion class, some perched on hay bales with wide eyes, at the parents holding their phones, at the veterans, arms crossed waiting, and at Sam standing firm, every line of her posture saying, I know the risk. I'm still here. Jack exhaled, long, slow. Then he stepped forward. If she fights, he said loud enough for Craig to hear, she fights on one condition. Craig raised a brow. What's that? No showboating. No blood. You hold back just like you do for your own students, or you face me next. The crowd buzzed. Craig's eyes narrowed. Sam added, and it ends in 3 rounds. No finishers. No knockouts. Just form. Control. Honor. Craig rolled his neck like a wolf sizing up a deer. Deal, he said, smiling wickedly. Though I should warn you, I don't lose in front of a crowd. Sam smirked. Maybe that's exactly why we're here. 20 minutes later, Sam was stretching in the prep tent behind the ring. Jack checked the wrap on her wrist again, his fingers slow focused. You sure about this? He asked. She nodded. He thinks I'm weak. Jack looked her in the eye. Then, let him underestimate you. She smiled. That's the plan. Luke appeared beside them, holding her mouthguard like it was made of gold. You got this, he whispered. You always tell us not to fight angry, just fight honest. She knelt to his height, touched his chin. Then I will, she said. I promise. The bell rang. Sam stepped onto the mat, breath steady. Across from her, Craig flexed dramatically, playing to the crowd. He bounced on his toes, gave an exaggerated wink to a group of high schoolers, and cracked his knuckles like he was already bored. The first round began. He came in fast, arrogant, wide strikes meant to rattle her early. Sam stayed light, dodging with precision, redirecting his energy, rather than blocking it head-on. Jack, watching from the sidelines, nodded. She's not fighting him, he murmured. She's dancing around his ego. Sam landed a clean palm strike to Craig's ribs. It wasn't hard, but it was controlled, intentional, measured. The crowd oohed. Craig's face changed, just slightly. A twitch in his jaw, a tiny crack in the smugness. The second round started. This time he came in tighter, more serious. A sweep aimed for her legs. She jumped, recovered, slipped behind him and tapped his shoulder before stepping back. Touch point. The crowd began to murmur. Sam Vega, the injured vet, had taken a round. By the time the final round began, the tone had shifted. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were leaning in, watching, rooting. Craig's hits grew sharper, desperate. A low elbow nearly caught her shoulder. Jack tensed. Don't you dare, he muttered under his breath. Sam stumbled. Craig grinned. But when he charged, something changed in her eyes. She moved like water, soft, but unbreakable, and ducked beneath his strike, sliding her arm into a clean textbook takedown that landed Craig flat on his back. 3-point contact. Bell. Silence. Then eruption. The crowd roared. Kids from the compassion class leapt to their feet, shouting her name. Luke threw his hands in the air like she'd just won the world championship. And Jack. He smiled. Not because she won, but because she did it on her terms. The moon had crept high over the fairgrounds, casting long silver streaks across the trampled hay and scuffed ring floor. Lights flickered above the crowd, casting an almost cinematic glow over what had begun as a friendly exhibition, but had now turned into something else entirely. The first 2 rounds had left the crowd breathless. Sam had moved like a whisper through the storm, precise, resilient, unshaken, even when Craig bore down on her with brute strength and thinly veiled contempt. She had countered him with grace, evaded him with clarity, and outmatched him with heart. And the people saw it. They stood, leaning forward, cheering for her. Not because she was perfect, but because she refused to bow. But in the third round, everything changed. Craig's smile had faded. His teeth were clenched now. The vein on his neck pulsed. He'd realized too late that the girl with the soft voice and damaged shoulder wasn't here to give him a good show. She was here to show the town what courage looked like when it didn't need to be loud. So he stopped playing fair. Jack felt it before he saw it. A shift in Craig's stance, a predatory lean, the kind of weight transfer only someone trained for war would recognize, a moment where principle gave way to pride. "He's setting her up," Jack murmured. Beside him, Luke whispered, "Dad." Then it happened. Sam moved into a front stance textbook clean, and Craig feinted a strike to her ribs. But his foot didn't stop where it should have. It slipped behind her ankle, and at the last second, his elbow snapped sideways, straight into her injured shoulder. The crowd gasped. A sickening pop echoed across the ring. Sam collapsed, her body crumpling like a soldier hit mid-charge. She hit the mat hard. Her head snapped back. She didn't move. Jack was already on his feet. The referee hesitated, unsure whether it was a real foul or just bad timing. A woman in the audience shouted, "She's hurt." Another man, Darnell's dad, stood up. "She's down." That's enough, but Craig didn't back off. He stepped forward again, looming, smirking down at her like a lion over prey. Sam stirred, groaned. Craig's voice slithered into the mic. "You want to quit now, sweetheart?" Boos erupted. Parents covered their kids' ears. The compassion class huddled, confused, frightened. Luke grabbed his father's hand. "Dad, do something." And something in Jack snapped. Not in anger, not in violence, but in purpose. He stepped through the rope, calm, controlled, shoulders squared like a man who'd buried pieces of himself and was now digging them back out. The crowd parted for him, not because he asked, but because they felt him coming. He knelt beside Sam and cradled her head gently. Her breath came in sharp, staggered pulls. "You with me?" he asked. She nodded barely, her face twisted in pain. He did it on purpose, I know. Jack, don't do something stupid." He smiled sadly. Too late. Then he stood. Not like a father, not like a mechanic, but like something else, something long forgotten, long buried. Craig straightened up as Jack entered the ring, eyes wide with performative innocence. She stepped into the ring. "No one forced her," Craig said, arms raised, voice mocking. "Accidents happen." Jack said nothing, just stared. And in that moment, the crowd saw it. The way Jack's jaw clenched, not in fury, but in discipline. The way his hands didn't shake. The way his entire being radiated one thing: stillness before the storm. Craig snorted. "What, you gonna fix her like you fix your trucks?" Jack took one step forward, then another. Craig faltered. "Just a bit." "You know the rules," Jack said, voice like gravel. 3 rounds, controlled contact. You broke everyone. You struck an injury you knew existed. You swept her ankle from behind. You mocked her when she was down. He paused. "Now you answer to me." Craig laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have a license." Jack nodded. "Don't need one." His eyes, those tired, storm-worn eyes, sharpened into something ancient, unmistakable. A warrior's gaze. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Is that really the ghost? No one's seen him fight in over a decade? Craig took a step back, but Jack took another forward. "I won't fight you like you fought her," Jack said. "Because what I teach, what we teach, is restraint." Craig opened his mouth to reply, but something in Jack's presence stole the words. Then Jack knelt beside Sam again, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You showed them," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." Sam blinked slowly. Don't lose yourself. I won't, Jack said softly. I'm not here to win. I'm here to restore what he tried to break. And then he rose. The lights above flickered. The crowd quieted. The storm was coming, but for once it wasn't a threat. It was justice. The ring had never felt so small. The lights above glared like judgment. The crowd was frozen, some standing, some sitting on the edge of hay bales, mouths slightly open, breath caught in their throats. Children clutched their parents' sleeves. Veterans leaned forward, their expressions unreadable. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Craig, still posturing, still smirking, but now with sweat beading at his temples. Across from him, Jack Rourke stepped over the rope with the quiet finality of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it. Not for pride, not for revenge, but for her, and for every student watching whose understanding of strength was still being written. Craig raised his fists. Didn't think you'd actually grow a spine, Ghost. Jack didn't answer. He simply tightened the black wraps around his hands, then bowed not to Craig, but to the crowd. Then he breathed. Low, deep, centered, and when he looked up again, he was someone else. The crowd could feel it, the stillness, the weight, like a mountain had just exhaled. Craig lunged first, predictably. He always opened with a right jab and tried to feint left into a hook. It had worked 100 times on eager kids desperate to prove themselves. Jack wasn't desperate. He stepped inside the jab before it landed, redirecting Craig's arm with a gentle parry, and pivoted on his heel, a jujutsu redirection so clean it looked like water finding its path. Craig stumbled, surprised, but caught himself. He snarled. "You think you're clever?" Jack didn't reply. He just moved again. This time Craig charged harder, more aggressive, hoping to pin Jack to the ropes. He swung low, an obvious leg sweep, but Jack was already rotating with the motion, his center low, his hips aligned. Aikido. Jack used Craig's momentum against him, shifting slightly and sending the larger man crashing into the hay bale. The crowd gasped. Craig scrambled up, face red, fists wild. He swung blindly, a left elbow meant to intimidate more than connect, but Jack slipped beneath it. Inside range. Too close for Craig's size to matter. Krav Maga. A knee came up, stopped 1 inch short of Craig's gut. Jack could have taken the air out of his lungs. Chosen violence. Made a statement. He didn't. Instead, he backed up. Slowly. Calmly. Control. Craig staggered. "Fight me, damn it, I am," Jack said. "You just don't recognize it because no one's taught you restraint," Craig screamed, charging again with a roar. This time, Jack allowed the contact, let Craig shove him back, pin his arm. But before the grip fully closed, Jack's hand rotated, locking Craig's wrist, twisting him into an armbar that dropped him to one knee. The crowd exploded. "Let him go! Tap out!" Jack released him before the ref could count to 3. Craig was breathing heavy now. Sloppy. His face wet with sweat and humiliation. "You just don't quit." "Do you?" he spat. Jack's voice was calm. "Not when people are watching." Craig snarled. "You think you're better than me?" Jack shook his head. "No. I just remember what this was supposed to mean." Then Craig did something that made the crowd go silent again. He pulled off his gloves and charged, full force. No form, no honor, just fists. Jack ducked under the first swing, sidestepped the second, and Crack delivered a single open palm strike to Craig's sternum. Enough to stop him. Enough to say I could have. Then Jack spun. One fluid, graceful movement. His right leg rose in a perfect arc, clean, fast, beautiful. A roundhouse kick. Craig turned and froze. Jack's foot stopped, 1 inch from his face. Just one. The wind of it kissed Craig's cheek. The message wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. "I could have broken you. I chose not to. Jack held the position for half a second, then slowly lowered his leg. Craig's breath was ragged. He dropped to his knees. The crowd was utterly silent. Then one clap, another. A wave of applause rolled over the ring, rising into cheers, whistles, and tears. Not for violence, not for a victor, but for discipline, for grace, for a man who could destroy but chose to teach instead. Luke ran toward the ring, climbing over the rope and flinging his arms around Jack's waist. "You didn't hurt him," he whispered, proud and trembling. "You showed him." Jack knelt, pulling his son into a full embrace. "That's the only kind of strength worth showing," he said. Sam, still bruised, sat just beyond the ring eyes, wide tears clinging to her lashes, not from pain, but awe. And deep, healing respect. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Jack stood again, raising Luke's hand in his own. Not in victory, in example. Behind him, Craig slowly stood, eyes down. For the first time that night. He didn't speak. He couldn't. What Jack had given him wasn't defeat. It was a mirror, and some mirrors cut deeper than fists ever could. The morning of the dedication ceremony broke gently over the town, with sunlight glinting off rooftops, like forgiveness made visible. Autumn leaves danced across the sidewalks in shades of burnt orange and gold, as if even the trees themselves were offering a blessing. Outside a modest, freshly painted building on Maple Street, a crowd had already begun to gather. Children fidgeted in their Sunday-best parents, leaned against car hoods, sipping coffee, and elderly veterans nodded solemnly at one another. Above the door, a new sign hung Guardian's Path, Martial Arts, where strength meets grace. Inside, the smell of polished wood and new beginnings lingered. Banners hung on the walls, quotes from Bruce Lee, Maya Angelou, even Mr. Rogers. At the front of the dojo stood Sam, her arm still in a sling, eyes shining as she adjusted the microphone. But it wasn't her who would speak first. Luke stood beside her, a little taller than before, wearing his white GI like a second skin. His voice trembled only slightly as he looked out at the sea of faces, young and old strangers, and friends, skeptics, and believers. "My name is Luke Rourke," he began. "I'm 10. I used to be scared of everything." A chuckle from the crowd. He smiled shyly. "But then I met a woman who fights even when it hurts. And I remembered I had a dad who used to be a ghost, but came back." He took a deep breath, then recited from memory words he'd once heard, whispered in their living room, now spoken like scripture. "My dad taught me that martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about staying calm when you have every reason to lose control. It's about protecting people even if they don't thank you. It's about remembering who you are even when the world tries to forget." A silence fell. Reverent. Then the room erupted into applause, slow rising like a tide. In the back row, a woman in her 80s leaned toward her husband and whispered, "This isn't a dojo. It's a temple of character." Sam stepped up beside Luke, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What we build here isn't just for self-defense. It's for self-respect, for healing, for standing tall when no one else will." And then, as if on cue, the back doors opened. Craig entered. He wore no Gino uniform, just a simple button-down and jeans. But what caught the room was not what he wore, but how he walked. Slow, intentional, humbled. Jack met his gaze from across the room, arms folded, unreadable. Craig stopped at the front, took the mic without asking, and turned to face the people he once sought to impress through power. "I didn't come here to make a speech," he began. "And honestly, I don't think I deserve a place in this building." No one interrupted. He swallowed. "But I came to say this, I'm sorry. To Sam, to the kids, to this community. I thought martial arts was about being feared, about being first, about never being questioned. He paused, his voice catching. But Jack showed me something else. He showed me that real strength doesn't come from fists. It comes from knowing when not to use them. He turned to Jack. Thank you for not finishing that fight, for showing me mercy. I didn't earn it, but it changed me. Jack gave a small nod. That's the point. Craig stepped back into the crowd, smaller now in posture, but somehow greater in spirit. Later that day, the dojo officially opened its doors. The first class was a mix of wide-eyed 7-year-olds, retired factory workers, single mothers, and teens who'd once believed they didn't belong anywhere. Jack stood at the back, watching them line up. Feels different than the last place, Sam said beside him. Yeah, Jack replied, because this one's built on something real. What should we teach first? She asked. He looked toward Luke, now showing a younger boy how to fall safely. Jack smiled. Compassion. Always. Sam glanced sideways at him. You ever think you'd be here again? He shook his head. Not in a million years. She nudged him gently. Well, turns out, you're a pretty good guardian, he chuckled. Takes one to know one. They stood in silence for a while, watching as a girl in a wheelchair was gently assisted into position by 2 other students, neither of whom had known her last week. That was the new rhythm here. This was no longer about belts or titles. This was the path. As the class began and sunlight streamed through the dojo windows, Luke turned briefly to the gathered parents, lifted his voice, and repeated the motto Jack had once whispered to him when he was too afraid to sleep. Strength without compassion is just control. Compassion without strength is just hope. But together, they build guardians. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Rourke didn't feel like a man haunted by the past. He felt like a father, a teacher, a warrior still. But more than anything, he felt like a man. Home. If this story touched your heart in any way, made you pause, reflect, maybe even smile through a tear, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's always a gift to see how far these stories reach and how they connect us across miles and memories. If you believe in stories that carry warmth, healing, and a little bit of quiet strength, consider subscribing to the channel. We don't post noise, just heartfelt tales like this meant to uplift and stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And from all of us behind the scenes, thank you, truly, for spending your time here with us, for listening with your heart, and for believing like Jack and Sam that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes the gentlest hands carry the strongest truth. Until next time, stay well, stay kind, and keep walking your own path. We'll be right here, waiting with the next story.